Hello everyone and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. Today I'll be continuing on with the Yuuei Survival Guide fic. This will be part 2, chapter 2. After school that day, Izuku had returned home to his quiet apartment after making a stop at a convenience store to grab himself some instant ramen for dinner. With his mother gone, there usually wasn't a lot of food in the house, but that didn't matter because Izuku didn't need breakfast. He'd always settle for a school lunch at the cafeteria, since it was offered and convenient, and when taking that option, he usually had a few hundred yen to spare to buy something for dinner, whether it be instant ramen or a bag of chips or even just a cheap chocolate bar. As long as he had one decent meal during the day, he was usually good to go. Overall, it had been a good day, Izuku decided as he stared down at the small carton of steaming water and noodles. He sat at the dining room table, fidgeting with a small packet of powdered broth and seasoning as he waits for the ramen noodles to cook. Sure, he'd literally almost been expelled. He'd broken a finger, the process of trying to not get expelled, and he was a bit afraid of his new sensei. But it had also been a good day, too. He had two new friends, Ida and Ochako, who'd met him after school and walked with him to the train station, and there was Shirakumo, too, who he wasn't really sure qualified as a friend or not, but Izuku, either way, he was there. Had to admit, Izuku was glad for the company of the ghost. He's sure he counted as well. So he'd made 3, 2.5 maybe, friends on the first day. How was he so lucky? And he hadn't gotten expelled on the first day either, even if it hadn't looked good for a second there. Honestly, what more could he ask for after how that morning's class had gone? Then there was the fact that a teacher had stopped Kachan from pummeling him with crackling palms and burning explosions. Teachers didn't do that, but Aizawa-sensei had. Izuku didn't know what to think about that. Aizawa-sensei scared the crap out of him, with his crazy cool quirk and his capture weapon, and then he'd protected him from Kachan when he could have turned a blind eye like everyone else. And on top of that, he made improvements to One for All. He could compartmentalize where he wanted to use it and minimize damage to his body because of it. Sure, it wasn't leaps and bounds into understanding his new quirk, but it was baby steps in the right direction. He hoped All Might would be proud of his progress, and he couldn't wait to tell the #1 hero what he'd done. When the noodles were finally soft enough to be edible, Izuku dumped in the packet in his hands and mixed it with his chopsticks. He'd pulled out the class syllabus to read over like Aizawa-sensei had suggested, but there wasn't anything particularly thrilling in it. He'd been waiting for this for years. He knew the basics of what this class would entail. He finished off his dinner before retreating to his bedroom. It was the only room in the apartment that had any personality, and the only real personality it did have was, well, All Might. Izuku liked to surround himself with inspiration, and what better inspiration was there than the #1 pro hero? And fine, maybe he was a little bit of a fanboy. The teen made his way back to his desk, pulling out one of his notebooks. It was already full, but there was room to add on specific heroes, like ones who he didn't have all the information on, like Eraserhead. He didn't have much on the underground hero, since there wasn't much online and like videos to study. But now he'd seen firsthand how the pro's quirk worked, and how he was such a great hero without having a flamboyant and overly powerful quirk, and let's be honest, that capture weapon scarf? So cool. Izuku scribbled down everything he'd learned about the underground hero, and was pleased with how the lines filled up. It had been empty for a long time, since he'd heard whispers of the erasure hero who could temporarily erase quirks. When he was done filling all that in, Izuku put that book back in his backpack before digging out his newest notebook. There was only a handful of heroes in this one, but he was sure it would be filled with his new classmates' quirks in no time. They were all so cool and powerful, there wasn't a doubt that most of them would make great pros. He shook his head fondly, flipping to the next available page. Shirakumo Oboro, quirk, ? Hero name, ? Usually he'd add more information he'd observed, like strengths and weaknesses, attack strategies, and a drawing of the person's hero costume, but he didn't know much about Shirakumo. He only really knew the ghost's name. But still, if he was wearing a Yuuei school uniform, he had to have some kind of cool quirk, right? He's not sure when the blue-haired teen passed away, but the development of quirkless students being allowed at Yuuei was incredibly new, and Izuku's not sure he's seen anyone at the school who's quirkless yet. He tapped the tip of his pencil against the page, frowning down at it. He shut the book with a sigh, turning in his chair to tuck away his backpack as well. Maybe he'd see the ghost again tomorrow. He did hang around Aizawa-sensei, right? Izuku would definitely see his homeroom teacher. Izuku did see Shirakumo the next morning, except instead of in Aizawa-sensei's class, the blue-haired boy was perched on the front desk in Yamada-sensei's class. English was his first class of the day, and would be followed by the other core classes. After lunch was when the fun really started, so the morning was more of just regular school. "I thought I might find you here," Shirakumo chirped as he slipped off the teacher's desk and trailed along behind Izuku, who moved to sit at his own desk. "I took a peek at your schedule and saw you have English with Hisashi. I'm usually hanging around him in the mornings anyways, 'cause Sho usually is asleep until he starts teaching, you know?" Izuku ducked his head in a nod, shuffling his books out of his backpack. He hadn't met present Mike-sensei yet, since the whole first day and had been dedicated to the quirk apprehension test. He'd seen the blonde-haired teacher around and had a couple pages on him in his notebook, but he hadn't met him. Izuku watched out of the corner of his eye as Shirakumo sat on his desktop. He took up some space, but it didn't bother Izuku. In fact, a smile slipped onto his lip as he rolled his pencil toward the ghost. It, as expected, rolled through him, prompting a yelp of surprise from the apparition. The green-haired boy jerked his attention around the room to see if anyone was looking at him before speaking under his breath to the ghost. "Not that I mind you sitting on my desk. I just might accidentally go through you, just as a warning." "No biggie," Shirakumo replied easily, sporting his grin. "Just don't touch my butt, cool? Or, you know what, do. It's been ages since I've had any action. I'll go to second base with you, Midoriya-kun, so touch my butt if you want." "I don't want." Izuku blew out a whisper that was perhaps a bit too loud, considering present Mike-sensei turned to look at him with a raised eyebrow. Izuku could feel a dark flush crawling up his cheeks, and Shirakumo's cackling laughter wasn't helping anything. He honestly wasn't sure if he was more embarrassed of what the ghost had said or the fact that his reaction had caught the teacher's attention. "Okay over there, little listener?" Mike had asked from the front of the class. "Fine," Izuku chirped promptly, rubbing the back of his neck anxiously. Some of the classmates that were in the room early with him glanced in his direction, but he didn't draw attention for long. Even Mike-sensei turned back to the chalkboard to keep writing out English sentences. "You're going to get me in trouble one of these days," Izuku blew out under his breath. The ghost at his side only seemed to laugh harder at that. "You're so not the first person to tell me that, and if the past is anything to go off, you're completely correct." "Oh, good," Izuku sighed dramatically, but shot the ghost a playful smile. There wasn't much time to chat after that. The bell had rung, and the rest of class flooded in, taking their seats in a hurry. No one wanted a repeat of yesterday morning with Aizawa-sensei. Present Mike had greeted them all with a loud and excited, "Welcome to English 1A. Glad to see you're all still standing, which means Eraser wasn't too hard on you yesterday. I'm Yamada Hisashi, or Present Mike if you'd like. We're going to have a lot of fun in here, you dig?" They'd done a brief orientation with Mike-sensei, but he didn't stay on the topic long. He seemed to want to jump right into lessons after they'd had a basic understanding of the school and his specific class. It was nice of him to take some of the class time to catch them up. Beside Izuku, Shirakumo had snorted something about present Mike cleaning up after Aizawa-sensei, and the green-haired boy could see it. He can't wipe the smile off his face when he thinks about present Mike-sensei doing damage control after Aizawa-sensei's class. He wonders if the two are friends. Mike-sensei obviously knows Aizawa-sensei pretty well if he knows to do damage control and debrief the students on the ceremony they missed. And if they are friends, how does Shirakumo know so much about them too? How does this teenager play into it? English class passes by quickly. Present Mike is a pretty good teacher, if not a bit loud. He's enthusiastic, and in turn they're all excited to learn. Well, as excited as they can be when stuck in English class learning grammar and stuff. They're all bored, but that's to be expected in any class that's not hero training. They're assigned a book that they'll be reading as a class, but Izuku just adds it to the collection of notebooks he already drags around. Shirakumo seems as laid back and relaxed in present Mike's classroom as he had in Aizawa-sensei's. Izuku watched him half-heartedly out of the corner of his eye. The blue-haired team would scooch off of Izuku's desk and stretch his legs, pace around in front of the room before standing beside Yamada-sensei. Izuku tried not to let his gaze follow the entity pacing the length of the front of the room, but he's sure he catches present Mike watching him with a furrowed brow at one point or another. Shirakumo seems comfortable doing as he does, and Izuku wonders how long he's been hanging around for. At one point, the ghost has even leaned too far into the voice hero in an attempt to read over his shoulder, to which present Mike had jerked up in shock, sidestepping away as a shiver racked his body. I should warn you listeners now, the AC in the school acts up sometimes. Keep a sweater handy, yo. Shirakumo had pouted, cutting off the apology that went unheard to the pro hero, and instead replaced it with a light glare. AC, huh? Shirakumo stepped through the blonde teacher, prompting a yelp of surprise. A look of disgust clouded Shirakumo's face, while present Mike accidentally let out a bit of his voice quirk, and it leaked into his surprised noise. Present Mike looked around for the source of the chill before letting out a laugh and apologizing for the ringing in the students' ears before continuing on with the lesson unfazed. Izuku hid his laugh behind his fist and a well-timed cough. Still, he felt his teacher's gaze flick in his direction, but he was too busy hiding his smile and forcing his attention onto the book in front of him, so he couldn't see the stupidly proud look on Shirakumo's face. Class continued on with little other distractions. Shirakumo returned to perch on the edge of Izuku's desk after the green-haired boy had shot him a glare for blocking his view of the board as he was trying to copy down notes. The ghost slouched with a pout, but Izuku forced his attention on the teacher and the class. You know, you could use me as a cheat sheet, right? I've been in this class for, I don't know, ever? I'm sure I could read that whole novel out in perfect English at this point by the number of times I've read over Zashi's shoulder. That's cheating, Izuku scoffed under his breath, as Present Mike talked of adjectives, nouns, and verbs. He was already dreading punctuation because commas and the English language were so hard to understand. It's only cheating if you get caught, Shirakumo hummed, matter-of-factly, and I seriously doubt anyone will be able to catch you getting answers from a ghost they can't see, or hear, or even sense unless I get too close to them. And you're sure you're a student here? Izuku snorts softly, angling his head to look at the ghost. Thankfully, he sat beside a window, so it wouldn't look as weird staring out it as it would for him to be staring down a wall. Your morals are questionable. I was, Shirakumo snaps back with a laugh. He doesn't appear angry or sad, his tone taking a teasing edge. The uniform doesn't lie, my friend, and my morals are perfectly fine, thank you very much. I still just don't understand the usefulness of English. Well, unless you planned on touring to America like All Might or something. But if you're going to be Japan-based, what's the point? Sounds like English is your favorite subject. Izuku's not sure where his quiet, sarcastic drawl comes from. The corner of his lips curl into a tiny smile when the ghost responds, though. There's just so many rules, the ghost cried out. Dumb rules. How can words be said the exact same way but spelled differently? There, Midoriya. What's up with that? And don't even get me started on read and read. It's literally the same word, but you pronounce it differently depending on when you're using it. Izuku blew out a breathy chuckle, gaze flicking up to the front of the classroom where Mike-sensei was still writing on the chalkboard before looking back at the ghost. He doesn't respond to the ghost because, as he opens his mouth to do so, their teacher spins around to address them. Shirakumo lets out a bright laugh as Izuku's teeth click together as he shuts his mouth. He shoots the ghost a glance of annoyance, but he knows his eyes are wide with humor. Classes with Shirakumo at his side might actually be a bit harder than Izuku had first thought. Thankfully, his new ghost friend doesn't follow him to every class. After English lets out, he doesn't see the ghost after the first few steps. As the spirit follows him out of the classroom, he sees Shirakumo wave out of the corner of his eye and twitches his fingers at his side in an attempt to return the gesture without looking like an idiot. He didn't have a chance to say goodbye verbally since Ida and Ochako managed to drag him into conversation as they walked to their next lesson, math. He almost misses the icy chill of the underseat beside him, but he's content with his living friends as well. Ida isn't as scary as Izuku first thought he was. She was just stern and serious about classes and school. And he supposed he needed a good influence on him after hanging out with Shirakumo, who wasn't, well, the greatest influence. He guessed ghosts didn't really have any consequences to their actions, not like Izuku, who could face detention or even expulsion if he were caught cheating in any way. He wondered if Shirakumo was like that when he attended Yuuei as a living student, or if the carefree nature came after he passed on. He adds the thought to his ever-growing list of questions he's just dying to ask him. Ochako is still bright and funny. She's friendly in a way people haven't been to him since before his friends started getting quirks, and it's refreshing. She falls into step with them and does most of the talking, filling their walk to class with positive words about English and Mike-sensei, as well as groans about how much she was not looking forward to math class. Izuku was in the same boat. Their morning curriculum finishes, and they're all swept towards the cafeteria and a mass of students heading there for lunch. Izuku's surprised by the bustling of students milling around and stood in line for food. The food is a bit more expensive than Izuku's used to, but it's totally worth the extra couple dollars because it's delicious. It's cheap by all standards, but to Izuku, whose income hadn't changed since his mother started spending less time at home, leaving him nothing more than a few bills of currency on the table to get himself by with, it's a bit on the pricey side. Still, it's cheap for the quality and amount you get, and it's the only option he's got if he wants enough substance to get through the day. He's used to food that tastes like cardboard but fills him up, the cheapest the school can get its hands on, so they can sell it for dirt cheap too. What lunch rush makes leaves him full and satisfied. He's greatly appreciative of it. It's totally worth spending his evening money on it. He eats with Ida and Ochako, and some of their other classmates sit at the tables close to them as well, but no one sits directly with them. Izuku checks over his shoulder occasionally to see if he can spot Shirakumo, but he doesn't. He tries not to frown and instead forces his attention on his friends instead. He actually doesn't see Shirakumo for the rest of the school day. He doesn't see Aizawa-sensei either, but that's okay because All Might is the one who's teaching their first fight training. Oboro is tucked away in the far corner of the teacher's lounge. His knees are drawn up to his chest, arms hugging them close, and his chin is dipped in the gap between his knees. He's sitting on a printer, but it's not like he weighs anything, so there's nothing to be worried about for breaking it. It's the only place he can sit where he's sure no one will brush through him, or he won't get in their way, and if the printer tiny menu screen keeps flashing error at his chilling energy, no one will notice. It's surprisingly dead in the teacher's lounge at this time, just before afternoon classes are to start. The teachers here manage their time well, so they left for their classrooms at about 5 minutes to the bell. Oboro knows their schedules just from watching. He's been watching for a long time, and all these teachers, minus All Might, have been here for years. There's only 2 teachers left in the room, and just watching them makes his heart warm. He's beyond glad they're still close, that they didn't let life tear them apart after they graduated, after they'd lost him. They needed each other. Anyone could see that. He's just glad those 2 obvious idiots didn't seem to, wait too long to realize it as well. Shota is wrapped in his sleeping bag, lying across the couch. He usually takes residence on it during breaks and his own free periods, and the staff always teased him that it was his couch. Sho would just grunt and look away, but Oboro knew he was content with the thought. He liked not having to fight anyone for the spot, though the dark-haired man wasn't above sprawling on the floor if it was occupied. On the other end of the couch was Shota's head. On his thigh is Hizashi. His mouth is moving as he reads over the worksheets he'd given Class 1A that morning to gauge what he needed to focus on more in depth and what the students seemed to understand well enough already. Oboro had tried to help Midoriya with his, but the green-haired boy seemed determined to do it himself, and the pride of the notion just made him smile. He'd been kidding about being Midoriya's cheat sheet, well, for the most part at least. An answer slipped here and there wasn't the end of the world, right? The 2 teachers are not really talking, but that's to be expected, since Hizashi is busy and Shota's eyes are closed as he tries to get some sleep before evening patrol. It had always been himself and Hizashi who filled the silences at school, so if Hizashi's not speaking, no one is. Shota had never been one to just talk for the hell of talking. So he, too, sits in silence. He'd long since given up trying to convince them he was there. It was a futile effort. An attempt, really. He had so little power over the living world, and no amount of trying gave him any results. It doesn't draw on for long. Midoriya, Hizashi hums out. Oboro's cheeks settle on his knee as he angles his head to look over at the 2 at the mention of his ghost-seeing new friend. Hizashi's eyes are on the paper he's holding up, and Shota cracks an eye open to look at him. He can barely see Midoriya's tiny yet formal scrawl on the top of his paper. He'd watched the teen write it, knew all of his answers. He knew what was right and what was wrong because he'd been watching Hizashi mark that exact paper for years. "What about him?" Shota asks gruffly, eyes shutting again as he melts further into his sleeping bag. Hizashi's spare hand, the one loosely holding his marking pen, brushed some hair from Shota's face without even looking down at him. It stays there for a second before he's lifting it to check off a correct sentence. "Nothing, really," the blonde mutters as he marks off an X on the paper. "He just caught my eye, is all." Shota hums indifferently, but they all know it's a do tell, The thought brings a smile to his face. It's been 13 years, and neither of them have really changed, besides maturing and growing a bit older. They're still the same Sho and Zashi he'd been sat next to in the cafeteria, laughing and joking around with. Well, he and Zashi joked around with, and had a shared goal of trying to get Shota to crack a smile. It was weird, Hizashi tells him, gaze not straying from the paper. I need to look into his files, because I think he might have ADHD, or something along those lines. I noticed some stuff today, and if he does have a developmental disability, then I want to be able to help him along. I didn't see anything of the sort when I looked through his file before school started. Shota does open his eyes now, head leaning back to look up at Hizashi. What did you notice? Well, lack of attention for starters. The blonde snorts a laugh, looking down at Shota with a fond smile. Besides that, he just kept looking around. I'd be talking, but he'd be staring out the window. He did a lot of muttering to himself, and at one point, his gaze was even dragging along the room like he was watching someone pace. I get English is kind of boring if you're not interested in it, but he wasn't actually acting like he was particularly bored, not like other students. Oboro feels his cheeks heat up. Oh. Izuku had been right. He was going to get him in trouble at some point. It was only the second day, and he'd already been distracting him. It's hard not to, though. Someone sees him, hears him. He's been isolated for so long, and now someone is there he can interact with. He keeps forgetting that Midoriya's not supposed to see him, but he does. Still, he doesn't want to be the reason that Midoriya fails a class. He has high hopes that Midoriya will become a great hero. He hasn't seen much from him, but he's got a fighting spirit. It's not bad or anything, Hizashi continues, and some of the fear drains from his chest as he listens, lips pressed in a tight line where he's still tucked away in the corner of the room. He seems to catch himself doing it and forces attention back. His grade on this paper is fairly good, too, considering that they probably haven't touched anything English since junior high. I'm just a bit worried. I actually noticed that, too. Shota lets out a deep sigh. The muttering and his lack of attention. He kept glancing away. I just assumed it was nerves, but it could definitely be something else, too. I didn't even think of that since it wasn't in his file. Huh. Hizashi sets the paper down on the armrest of the couch with the other graded papers, finally looking down at Shota. I guess we can see what the other teachers think after a few classes with him and watch over him for the next couple of weeks. If he hasn't already been diagnosed, maybe we could suggest looking into it. Then again, I could be just looking way too far into this. It's only my first day with him, after all. Maybe he's just an odd kid. It's not like you weren't. I resent that, Shota huffs out lowly. Oboro can't see it, but he knows his friend is rolling his eyes at Hizashi. I don't remember you being overly normal either. Hey, Hizashi laughs, and if he hadn't thrown the first shot, I was more normal than you, Mr. Grumpy Pants. Our classmates spoke to me, at least. Out of obligation, it's hard to ignore that voice of yours, Shota snorts out. Besides, they were mostly idiots anyways. I didn't want to speak to them. You're lucky I talked to you, Tensei, and Oboro. Not that you three were much better than the others. And don't even get me started on Nomuri. Being friends with you lot was irrational. Aw, Sho, Hizashi coos, patting the man's forehead softly. But you loved us. Why else would you stick around if we were so irrational? Shota gives an indifferent hum, but Oboro hears the fondness in the sound. His heart feels warm in the same way it does whenever they talk about him. It's nice to know they still remember him, not that he thinks they'll ever forget. They've only just recently come to a place where they can say his name without getting all dreary and despondent. It's nice to see. He's glad he's not a big sore topic anymore. He hated the looks on their faces, the pain, the heartbreak, how the room fell silent when he was mentioned. They still have bad days, usually his birthday and the anniversary of that fateful day, but he's glad they have good days of reminiscence now, too. They can say his name and think back and smile. He feels his own face crack a smile as the two continue talking. They've carried on from talking about Midoriya, and now are focused on another of the green-haired boy's classmates. He hasn't gotten around to memorizing all of their names yet, and he can barely picture their faces, but in his defense, he had something else to be focused on in his time. Slowly the conversation fades to the usual silence, Shota's even breaths as he sleeps, and Hizashi's pen scraping on the paper as he marks. Oboro lets his own eyes drift shut, even if sleep is a foreign concept to him now. Midoriya is looking worse for the wear as he walks home that day. Battle training had been brutal, especially on his first day of actual training. All Might really hadn't gone easy on them, and Aizawa-sensei was right that he needed to be prepared for lessons. He just hadn't thought to take it quite so literally. Kacchan certainly hadn't held back either, and Ida had been a worthy competitor as well. Honestly, Izuku's surprised that he and Ochako had won in the end, but if he didn't know Kacchan as well as he did, having grown up studying his childhood friend, he's not sure they would have stood a chance at all. Kacchan was strong, both physically and being headstrong. If Izuku couldn't predict his attacks, he wasn't sure he'd be standing here at all right now. So yeah, in the end, they'd won. They hadn't come out of it unscathed. Well, Izuku definitely hadn't, but it was a victory all the same. Their first victory with their powers. He had spent the rest of class with Recovery Girl, and he was beyond tired. Recovery Girl had used up most of his stamina, but he was still incredibly sore. She hadn't managed to do much since he had no stamina left to give, but she'd given him first aid treatment and an IV drip. Recovery Girl hadn't wanted him to leave, but she'd caved when he promised he'd go home and sleep until the morning. He wondered what that said about him, that a school nurse was already keen on him. It's late afternoon when he's finally granted permission to leave, and that's only when he promises to return to her the following morning after resisting and resting and recharging his stamina so he's strong enough for her to heal him up before class the next day. It'll be decided from there whether or not he'll be going to his classes or resting up with her until he's got enough stamina to fully fix all the injuries. He really hopes it's the former of the two because he's got a feeling Aizawa-sensei won't be too pleased with him for missing class twice in a row. When he goes to grab his backpack from the classroom, he's all but ambushed by his new classmates. They're very kind as they introduce themselves and rattle on about how the rest of the battles went. He wished he could have been there to see them. They sounded so cool. He tried to talk to Kacchan, too, after their intense battle, but his childhood friend hadn't seemed very interested in making amends or hearing Izuku out at all. Not a lot is said, but Izuku manages to blurt out his piece, so that's a weight off his shoulder. It feels like he owes his oldest friend a bit of an explanation about the situation, because Kacchan is the only one to really know what Izuku came from, who he'd been before he was accepted to Yuuei. Kacchan is how he reacts. There's a lot of yelling, and it's not nice a conversation, but it's needed one nonetheless. It actually ends on relatively good terms, considering Izuku doesn't end up on the receiving end of a palmful of explosive glycerin sweat. And after that, Kacchan heads home without another word, while Izuku goes back inside to grab his stuff and say goodbye to his classmates. They had all waited for him after all. He walks out of the school with his broken arm in a temporary cast and a sling, and a bandage covering the remnants of his burn from Kacchan's quirk. He doesn't feel completely awful, all things considered, but he definitely looks it. "Holy shit, Midoriya, what the hell happened to you? You look like you went 3 rounds with the Incredible Hulk." He'd felt the presence behind him before he'd heard the voice. Shirakumo falls into steps with him, but his face is tense with worry. He's scanning Izuku from head to toe, bottom lip caught between his teeth. Despite the obvious worry in the statement, Izuku can't help his attention first focusing on the Incredible Hulk comment. It brings a smile to his lips as he lulls his head in the ghost's direction. "Wow, talk about a classic film," Izuku huffs out a laugh. And actually, that guess isn't too far off from the truth. If I didn't know any better, I'd think he slammed me around too. "Yeah, I know." A light smile slips onto Shirakumo's face, and for a second the worry is replaced. "I'm surprised you understood the reference, since not many people do. Zashi's a sucker for American movies, likes the old ones most, and you can't go wrong with superheroes. I've seen most of those old Marvel films." He sobers up, frown tugging back into his face again. "And that doesn't answer my question, dude." "We did some battle training today," Izuku explains tiredly, keeping his head ducked so no one sees him talking to himself. Luckily, the majority of students have already left, and his classmates were finishing up the tidying of the classroom and going over their battles when he'd left, so there's only a few people around. "I won my match, but it feels like I lost." "Battle training? On the first official day?" Shirakumo's eyebrows lift in surprise. "No kidding. I didn't stick around for all the details on how you got hurt, but Shota definitely wasn't aware of that." Izuku's shoulders lift in a pained shrug. "All Might was teaching us, and Sensei wasn't around. Aizawa-sensei didn't plan this? Yesterday he told me to be prepared. You're usually with Aizawa-sensei, aren't you? Was he around?" "Yeah, that's a big no on the Sensei awareness thing. Sho definitely knew something of the battle plans, or he knew nothing of it, or he wouldn't have let All Might teach alone. Would never have allowed the battle training so soon, not when he's still learning your guys' quirks. Shirakumo snorts out a noise that sounds suspiciously like a laugh. You know, those two are not on the best terms. I doubt they'll ever see eye to eye. Sho's never liked All Might very much. Simply a difference of opinions. Yeah, I picked up on that All Might and Sensei rift when Aizawa-sensei was talking about an overzealous hero yesterday. It wasn't exactly subtle. Izuku clicked his tongue with a light smile, eyes flicking to Shirakumo before dropping back down to his shoes. Yeah, subtlety isn't his thing. Shirakumo snorts in agreement. The blue-haired boy deflates a bit after that, almost guiltily. And, yeah, I was with him, but Sho didn't really say much about the plan for you guys. Nezu was the one who decided All Might would be teaching the class, but he really wasn't supposed to do any battle training. Not yet, or so early in the year. Sho's going to be pissed as soon as he hears. We were in the teacher's lounge, and he was preparing for you guys coming back to the classroom after what was supposed to be individual exercises to get you using your quirks in a controlled environment, so All Might could get a feel for your power like Sho did. Not battle simulations. The older teen pauses, chewing on his lip before he continues. Shota was confused in his annoyed way, but you just didn't show up for class. The only thing that your class told him was that you were with Recovery Girl. I wanted to check on you, but thought you might want some privacy. Shota was worried about you, you know, but he couldn't just leave his class unattended, and you were with Recovery Girl. It was only after school was over that he'd stormed into the office to talk with Nezu and All Might that he was told what actually happened, and I came to find you as soon as I heard how you got hurt. There was a warm feeling in his chest at the admission that Shirakumo had come to find him when he'd heard he'd been injured. Thanks, that means a lot. I'm okay now. Shirakumo didn't look convinced, but he let it go for the time being, shoes scuffing against the pavement as they walked. He'd gone to kick a pebble, but had just phased through it, only to keep walking indifferently. You didn't miss much in Sho's class, if you're worried about that. He mostly wanted to go over the syllabus with you guys and pick apart your costume choices, functionality and all that. That's what he does every year. Oh, Izuku hums out, nodding his head. Wish I had been there. I like my costume, but it probably needs more adjustments. I mean, it was in shambles by the time the exercise was over. Well, to be fair, you did get blasted, Shirakumo reminds him with a grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, but villains will be a lot crueler than Kachan was. Shirakumo gives a heavy shrug of his shoulder. He couldn't refute that. The older looked away for a second before clearing his throat. Anyways, I'm sorry I missed your battles. I bet you kicked ass, huh? You did win. That's still an accomplishment, even if, you broke yourself to the max. I'm starting to get used to that, Izuku gave a light laugh, rubbing the back of his neck with a burnt hand. It's only the second day, and I'm already a regular patient in the infirmary. And I'm pretty sure I already have an appointment tomorrow morning with Recovery Girl, too, so that'll be 3 days in a row, in 3 days of school. That's got to be like a record or something. Shirakumo lets out a hearty laugh. It fades off naturally, but when Izuku looks over, after a second of silence, his now friend is staring at him with an unreadable expression. Shirakumo continues before he can mutter a word, though. Seriously, though, all jokes aside, you good? Mm-hmm. Izuku gives the other a smile that doesn't completely reach his eyes. I'm a bit sore, but that's to be expected. I just want to go home and sleep, really. Recovery Girl drained most of my stamina, but on the bright side, I look a lot better than I did. Don't tell me that, Shirakumo squawks with a heavy frown. His foot scuffs against the ground as they stroll towards the train station side by side. You look awful now. I don't want to imagine you looking worse. Gee, thanks, Izuku snorts a laugh. Really, though, I'll be okay. After some sleep and another visit to Recovery Girl, at least. Are you sure you're okay to walk home alone? Shirakumo can't help but ask. They've reached the train station and are waiting for Izuku to arrive. I can walk you home. I mean, I'm not much good if you collapse or anything, but I'll panic for you if you do. My hero, Izuku shakes his head with a tired-sounding laugh. I'm good, though. Anyway, shouldn't you be with Aizawa-sensei or Present Mike-sensei? I was under the impression that that's where you tended to spend your time. They're busy, Shirakumo sighs, attention dropping to his feet. Sho'll be asleep by now, because he's got night patrol, and Zashi's got his radio thing tonight. Right. Put Your Hands Up radio, right? I listen to that sometimes. It's pretty good. That's the one, Shirakumo sighed. He's only live on Fridays, but he spends a lot of time there prepping everything and making his set list of songs he wants to play. It's super boring, worse than UA classes are, because there aren't even students for me to root for, just Zashi and his team of radio people. Sounds it, Izuku hums as the train finally arrives, slowing to a stop in front of them. He hesitates a second after the door opens. Glancing at his side, he bites his bottom lip, bandage arm hugging around the arm in his sling. You're welcome to come home with me. I probably won't be much more entertaining than Aizawa-sensei or President Mike-sensei, though. I'm under strict instructions from Recovery Girl. Izuku shuffles his feet. But I can turn the TV on or something, though. Not sure what you'd like to do, but I can help you get set up before I head to bed. TV or music or YouTube rabbit hole or something. It'll pass the time. Really? Shirakumo perks up. You'd do that? Yeah, sure. Izuku grins widely in return. I mean, you can do anything you'd like while I'm asleep. There's a warning that the train doors are going to close, so Midoriya steps in before they do, pausing there and turning to look at the coast. So you coming? Sure. Shirakumo barely takes a second to decide. The decision is nearly instant. How could he say no when the offer was so awesome? Midoriya would leave the TV on for him. He'd be able to choose the channel and everything. It's been so long since he's watched something he actually wanted to watch. Just until Show's patrol, so I can keep an eye on him while he's out. Yeah, all right, Izuku smiles, but he looks tired. He wouldn't look quite as bad if he weren't subconsciously slouching over in exhaustion. Shirakumo's not sure why this kid should be walking home and riding the train home alone. Surely a parent should have come to pick him up from school, right? The blue-haired teen wants to set a hand on Midoriya's arm in an attempt to help keep him upright. It's a familiar movement he'd done to Shota loads of times during their days at school, when his grouchy-faced friend would overwork himself or stay up too long without sleep. He wants to reach out but thinks better of it. He's just something cold right now, and that's not what Izuku needs. Recovery Girl really did a number on you, huh, Midoriya? I'd say, the boy huffs as he flaps his slinged arm slightly as if waving Shirakumo off, rubbing his other bandaged hand over his tired eyes as he does. You can call me Izuku, by the way. We're friends now, aren't we? He pauses for a brief moment before seeming to register what he said, jerking upright with wild eyes. I mean, if you want, and I didn't mean to insinuate that you're coming over to my place and you're staying the night. Well, I mean, technically you'll be leaving late in the night, I guess, but if you're Izuku, then call me Oboro, cool? Shirakumo cuts him off with what Izuku is starting to realize is his signature smile. That's what friends do, right? First name basis? Yeah, Izuku swallows, feeling a weight off his shoulders at the acceptance. That's what friends do. Izuku's apartment isn't quite what Oboro expects. It's nice, don't get him wrong. It's clean and furnished. Wide and spacious. It's a nice living space, just it's not very lived in. The apartment doesn't have much personality. There's no framed photos or art or decor at all hung on the walls. The colors are bland and neutral, like that out of a home decor magazine you'd find in a doctor's office waiting room. It's quiet, which isn't supposed to be odd, but there's just something weird about how eerily quiet the place is. It's clear that Izuku lives here, from his backpack dumped on the couch to an empty carton of ramen on the counter by the sink. There's loose school papers and a book on the dining table, along with a syllabus that Shota had requested the kids picked up. There's a pair of All Might-themed slippers on his feet as he shuffles through the place, turning on any lights he needs as he makes his way further into the apartment. It's late in the evening now, but it's still a few hours until Shota heads on patrol. Where are your parents coming home, or when are they coming home? Oboro asks, with a tilt of his head. Izuku's movements have gotten sloppy, feet dragging as he plops down on the couch and grabs the TV remote. He's not sure he really wants to leave Izuku alone in this state, but he also doesn't want to miss out on a patrol with Shota. It's been routine for him since Shota started his patrols as an underground hero. He went with Hisashi on his too. He arranged it perfectly. As soon as Shota was back, Hisashi would be leaving for his early morning patrol, so Oboro could just fall into step with him instead while Shota passed out. Then he'd follow them to school after Hisashi was finished his patrol. My mom won't be home, the boy tells him shortly, rubbing at his eyes again. It takes a second for Oboro to remember his question, but when he does, his glance shifts uncertainly to Izuku. She works a lot. I don't see her very often. Oboro bites his lip, interlocking his hands together in front of him, as he moves to join Izuku. He doesn't sit yet, instead watching over the back of the couch. The boy looks even more tired now than when he's actually sitting. His eyes are slipping shut, but they flutter open when he catches himself dozing off. And your dad? Your guess is as good as mine, Izuku shrugs as he fiddles with the remote. He's out of the picture. Okay. Was there anything specific you wanted to watch? You can use my laptop if you want to watch some YouTube, but if you do that, you'll be at the mercy of autoplay. TV's the same way, but we can at least check the guide to see what'll be on. What time does Aizawa-sensei leave for patrol? Midnight, Oboro answers without much thought. And TV's fine, but, don't you think that you should eat something before you go to sleep? Recovery Girl always force-fed us those weird gummies she has, but eating something would do the same thing. Nutrients, you know? No, Izuku shakes his head. I'm not hungry, just tired. He knows he should argue that. How does Izuku plan to refresh his stamina without nutrients? Even one of Shota's stupid jelly pouches would be better than nothing. Still, it's not his place to push, not here or now while he's a guest in Izuku's apartment. Got a channel in mind? Izuku breaks the moment of silence, head lolling back against the couch to glance up at Oboro. Hero documentaries, Oboro suggests with a shrug. He's not really versed on what they show on TV nowadays. He has to rack his brain for something suitable. Neither Shota or Hisashi watch much TV, and when they do, it's usually films, American films at that. Shota's more of a book person, and Hisashi will choose music over a TV show any day. It hasn't changed since their teen years. He remembers liking hero documentaries, though, forcing his friends over to his house and making them watch them with him. He'd be vibrating in his seat, with Hisashi's wide eyes staring at the TV, too. Shota beside them looked bored, but there was a twinkle of interest in his eyes as they watched the TV as well. That'll be us someday, he remembers chirping out with a wide grin, pointing to a trio of lesser-known heroes on the large television screen in his living room. He doesn't even remember their names now, or where they even are in life anymore, whether they're still heroes or retired or, well, dead. That doesn't matter, though, because they'd been a staple in his adolescent years, and he'll never forget that. Of course it will, Yo. We'll be the best heroes, Hisashi had chirped back, grinning brightly as he glances over, looking first at Oboro, then down a little bit to Shota on the other end of the couch. The three of us will be some of the greatest, like All Might. If you say so, Shota had shrugged, but his eyes glowed with interest. Course we say so, Oboro remembers laughing, tossing an arm over each Hisashi and Shota's shoulders and pulling them in close. We'll start our own hero agency, and it'll be awesome. You, me, and Zashi. Hey, you okay? Oboro pulls himself from his thoughts to see Izuku watching him. His eyes are lidded, but the worry is prominent. You just kinda left for a second there. Oh, Oboro breathes out quietly. Oh, yeah, no, I'm good. Fine. Perfectly fine. Just, it doesn't matter. You should be resting. You've got school tomorrow, and you're already going to be playing catch-up in Sho's class, so get some rest. Okay, Dad, Izuku snorts, and Oboro doesn't have the heart to tell him that if he were alive, he'd be old enough that he could actually be his father. Well, if he had him at like 15 anyways. Yeah, he offers softly instead, rounding the couch to settle down beside the green-haired teen. The TV lights up in the room, playing old hero documentaries that Oboro can almost remember watching if he digs into the depths of his brain. It's nice. Beside him, Izuku's breath evens out, remarkably fast. His lack of stamina is hitting him really hard. The kid's face is pressed into the couch, at Oboro's side, hand curled around the remote. He looks oddly peaceful despite his injuries and the fact that he'd passed out in the presence of a ghost he'd known for 2 days. Oboro had thought that the teen would have retreated to his own bedroom when the TV was on, since the lights and sounds could be distracting, but he hadn't. The teen had drifted to sleep easily, and he must have been pretty damn tired to be able to do so. He actually likes the company, though, even if Izuku's not even awake. It takes everything in him, literally all his effort and energy, to tug the blanket that's draped over the back of the couch down over his friend. And then when the younger boy is curled up in a particularly unfolded blanket, Oboro slips to the floor, scooches so that his legs are under the coffee table so that he doesn't risk Izuku accidentally touching him and jolting awake at the chill. He enjoys every second of the documentaries and evened out breaths behind him. He doesn't feel quite as lonely. This concludes Yuuei Survival Guide Chapter 2. I'll continue on with the next chapter as soon as possible. I hope you guys are enjoying this fic. Thank you all so much for listening.